Hey, Randy Joe here, and this is 1001 Reviews, the series where I plan on reviewing every single album from the 1001 albums to listen to before you die. And today we are looking at the Avalanches' 2000 album, Since I Left You. Since I Left You was produced under the Modular label by Bobby C. and Darren Seltman, with art direction from Bobby Dazzler, nationality Australia, with a running time of 60 minutes. And throughout this 60 minutes, you get one of the single greatest experiences I've ever had with the genre of Plunderphonics. Now, Plunderphonics, if you are unaware, is a genre that includes sampling and using a heavy use of sampling to create these massive and large-scale soundscapes, typically. And an album like this, Since I Left You, is definitely one of the few examples of Plunderphonics where I think most people could easily jump into and can really appreciate the concept of it. Typically, some of the Plunderphonics albums I've heard otherwise from this one are more experimental or hard-hitting with their uses of sampling and is a bit more jagged in their approach to it. Whereas Since I Left You is just so incredibly smooth with how they decide to use these samples. And straight from the beginning with the opener, the title track here on the album, you get this incredibly dreamlike atmosphere and really throws you into the style and sound that will continue to dominate throughout this 1 hour runtime. It completely transports you to this sort of realm and is just very warm in its approach, especially with the fact that these samples throughout this entire album have a very warm aesthetic, thanks large part in how they decided to approach the sampling process here. And by that I mean when making this thing, the Avalanches allegedly went through just thousands of different records, and with this approach they were recording and sampling straight from the record, which leaves in these very poppy and static filled warmth that you would get from a turntable. It captures every crackle and every pop and feels very authentic to that approach, almost as if you were listening to a vinyl record yourself, but instead it is just right into your ears. It is so just dreamlike and warm and nostalgic in a way. Few records manage to capture this sort of tone and style, and usually this is more of a lo-fi kind of thing, and it feels often to me quite synthetic in the approach. But this time I think with the Avalanche, with the way they went about recording straight from the record, it creates a much more raw and real, authentic replication of the pop and crackle of a turntable. Now the first track here, Since I Left You, does smoothly transition right into the next track here, Stay Another Season, which has a sampling of almost like pool table balls kind of clashing against one another. It's introduced at the end of the first track and smoothly brings it into the second track here. The album continues to do this pretty much throughout. Almost every single track here ends with some sort of sound that is introduced prior and carries over into the next, which really does create a very continuous flow like album. You can skip to each different track and get a completely different, new, and vivid sound in this dreamlike realm, but at the same time, if you listen to it straight through, it almost feels like a 1 hour song that goes on into these different directions. Which reminds me of something like, for example, Not a Gun Infinity by King Gizzard, where every track goes into the next and loops back into the first. And seeing something like this on the Avalanches record here from 2000 is truly amazing because it is just done so well. Another spectacular thing about this album is the way it fuses genres with the amount of records that are being sampled here. You have, for example, on the third track, Radio, which goes into a much funkier, more disco approach. Or for example, you have the track Avalanche Rock, while short, has almost like a rap aesthetic to it. Later in the album, you have the track Frontier Psychiatrist, which is a song that I heard many years ago and instantly fell in love with, and still to this day think is one of the greatest tracks to come out of the 2000s. It is such an incredible use of Plunderphonics and really shows the extent of the Avalanches, because with this song you have such a great use of samples to create almost a narrative of sorts and create a very almost insanity-induced fever dream of a track. In fact, this is such a fever dream of a track that there are two important solos in it. The first of which is just a regular bird sample that either is a real bird or is just a record being scratched. It's kind of hard to determine or distinguish from the two. On top of that, you have another solo from another bird, this time specifically a parrot. And a parrot solo is not something I ever thought I would hear because it just seems so bizarre and absurd in a way, but the Avalanches managed to mix it in to this very rockish sound and create just a very interesting passage in this album. It's so unique and something that only the Avalanches could pull off this smoothly. And then Frontier Psychiatrist actually trails off into a Latin/Hawaiian-esque type sound as it really drowns out the previously insane and almost absurd sound effects that you were previously hearing and goes further into this very dreamy, warm, beach-like atmosphere. And truthfully, I can't think of an album that captures the concept of Plunderphonics, such a unique and incredible genre, as effectively as this album right here. So with that being said, the soft rating of this album came to a 9.1 out of 10, but I will hard that rating down to a 9 out of 10. It is almost a perfect album, but I do think that with some songs definitely being significantly greater than others, you are left to these almost lull-like moments in the track list here. And finally, on top of that, with all this praising of the album and with how much I think it is significant, especially in the Plunderphonic genre, it should come as no surprise that I'm giving this a E for essential. This is definitely an essential album, and for music fans, there is quite a bit to really get out of this. It is so incredibly heavy on the sampling especially that I think most people will just find that alone to be a fascinating listen. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this review. Let's see what the next album we are listening to is in the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. Alright, random number generator, 1 to 1001, generate 359, which is 359 being Joan Armatrading 1976. Anyways, that pretty much does it for this video. If you like, please hit like and subscribe if you want to follow along and listening to every single album from the 1001 Albums to Listen to Before You Die book. And as always, my name is Randy Joe, and I am signing off.